Welcome to the Relational Grace Podcast, where we share the teachings of Pastor Nick Harris, who taught us that Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship. I'm your host, Jamie Russell, Pastor Harris's son. It's truly hard to believe that we're approaching the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. As many of you are well aware at this point, Pastor Harris, my dad, was the pastor at First United Methodist Church, which is situated directly east of the OKC bombing site. Dad was at the church that day, and we've shared his story in both audio podcasts as well as video on our YouTube channel. However, in this episode, we'll hear from Kris Skinner, a cherished family friend and a former employee of First Church that was there meeting with Dad at the moment the bomb went off, on that day that for many has been frozen in time. As a reminder, we have published several OKC bombing-related episodes over the life of this podcast. 4 that I will mention specifically. There's episode 50, which features the sermon Pastor Harris delivered on April 16th, 1995, just 3 days before the bombing. It would be the last sermon that would be delivered in that 100-year-old sanctuary. In episode 51, we hear from Pastor Harris as he tells his story of the day of the bombing. In episode 52, we feature an interview we had with OKC Bombing Survivor Arlene Blanchard, who was in the Murrah Building when the bomb went off. Arlene had attended Loaves and Fishes, a lunch Bible study that First Church facilitated and Dad taught for many years. In that discussion with Arlene, she reveals one word that Dad taught on that gave her the strength to persevere. And finally, in episode 100, we feature the story of a surprise concert that Rich Mullins himself gifted the people of First United Methodist Church. Now, before we jump into this conversation with Kris Skinner, I wanted to pass along a preview of what is to come. In lieu of sharing one of Dad's Easter messages as we enter Holy Week, we're very excited to share Dad's series titled The Birth of the Church in the weeks following Easter. Join us as Pastor Harris takes a deep dive into the book of Acts and follow along as we watch the early church come into form from the inside out. So with that, please join us in a conversation my sister Amy and my mother Crystal and I had the pleasure of having with our dear friend Kris Skinner.
Well, we are so excited. This is an interview we have been anticipating for a very long time. We are here with our friend, Miss Kris Skinner, and we are just so excited to get to know a little bit more about you and your story. I would just love to hear a little bit more about you, your upbringing, where you're from, and how you ended up at First Church.
Well, interesting enough, I'm a Kansas girl, not an Oklahoma girl. Born and raised in Kansas, and I've lived in several other states besides that, but I was in Kansas up into my teen years and then went to college in Nebraska and ended up back in Kansas for a little while when my mother was ill and needed me to be home to help care for her. And in the early 80s, I decided that I wanted to come to OU to go to school to finish a degree in business, because while I was in college in Nebraska, I did not finish completely there. So at that time in Nebraska, I need to backtrack a little bit here. I did not have a relationship with the Lord when I first started college, but I met several friends who were Christians at that time. And they probably still are, if they're not with the Lord now. But anyway, I had several friends praying for me, knowing that a relationship with Christ would make a difference in my life. And I was taking care of a friend's home while they were out of town. And I was watching something on TV and remembered that it was like I heard a voice that says, "When will you come?" I looked around the room and I could not see anyone. And I thought, and then I heard it again, "When will you come?" And I knew who that was. And at that point, I gave my life to Christ, asking Him to forgive me of my sins. And it was like on Sunday morning. That was a Saturday night. On Sunday morning, I was getting ready to go to church. And it was like the sky was bluer than I've ever seen it. Everything had clarity. It was so real. Before that, I was kind of like living in a fog. But God gave me clarity. And so from that point forward, It was just a walk, a daily walk, letting friends know what commitment I had made and getting into study, into church. And about a year later, a friend of mine asked me if I would help with a youth group in our church. And then I found another friend that asked me to help with another group, a youth group. And so I started helping them. And this friend said, "Have you heard of Youth for Christ Campus Life?" Mm-hmm. I said, "Yes." They said, "I think you need to visit with someone." So this gentleman came to one of the meetings, and we visited afterwards, and he said, "I would like you to consider coming to work for us." And so it was about 6 months later. There was a long application, all this, but I sent it in, and they accepted my application. And it was like going on the mission field. You have to raise your own support, the whole works, just to go to work with this ministry. I was accepted. I went to work. I ended up in Minnesota, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And I spent 6 and 7 years there working for Campus Life. I was in Chicago several times doing work for the ministry. And then my mom was sick again, so I ended up back in Kansas. And then after she became better, I decided to go back to school. And that's when I came to Oklahoma. That was in the early 80s. And so I was at OU for a while. I worked for Security National Bank in Norman. That bank went under. So I ended up, I did about 2 years, a year and a half of school there, and I got into banking. And that's when I started attending church at First Church. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I need you to come check this minister out." And I was going to the First Baptist Church in Norman. I said, "Okay." I stepped in that church and did not step out of the church until I left the church after working for the church, and that was 15-some years later. But I had worked in the banking for a while, and Nick and I had talked several times, just passing, and I got to meet my sweet dearest friend, Kris Harris, who became a dear sister in Christ and has always been for a long time. Just a jewel in my life. But anyway, Nick asked me if I would consider going to work in the church because there were some changes that were occurring. So I spoke to the PPR and ended up going to work at the church in 1989. And I was with the church until after Nick left, when he retired, and then went to Ariel Chapel for a while. And then I've progressed to a church here in Oklahoma City that I attend, which is Burton Christian Church. And it is my church home now.
So your friend invited you to downtown Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about Dad's teaching that meant the most to you?
He made it real.
Mm-hmm.
When you read the Word, you need somehow, it's like painting a picture or making a puzzle. You have to have all the pieces fit together for that picture to come alive. And Nick painted a picture. He drew pictures. I mean, he spoke in a way that was down to earth. It was real. Mm-hmm. It was not so over our heads that we couldn't understand what he was saying. And it came alive. Mm-hmm. So I was drawn to that. It was just like a sponge, just sucking up everything I could.
I love it.
I think we hear a lot about Dad's teachings from those who maybe need it to be a lot easier spoken to them. And then you've got like our really smart people that, Dad could do both. And he could explain it to someone who just needed the basics.
Yes.
And he could challenge anybody who thought they knew more about it,
Yes.
All in the same message.
All in the same message.
Yeah.
Yeah. All at one time. So.
Yeah. I think what I really enjoyed about, I would see a lot of people that we became familiar with, and they would be sitting up in the balconies or sitting in the back of the church, and then like a month later, they'd be at the front of the church, down out of the balconies, and just leaning forward to say, what's he going to say next?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, they were just like, I love this.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were hired, what was your title and what were your responsibilities?
I was director of property and programming, basically overseeing the facility and the staff that helped take care of it. And to some of the programming, we did weddings and a lot of other activities, and it was just getting things on the calendar and making sure everything worked and everything was in place when we ever had an activity or an event. But my responsibility kind of blew up after the bombing. So,
well, tell us about traveling with Dad. I know you were able to go on a couple trips to Israel with him. What do you remember most about those trips?
One thing that well, there's several things, and I can't put it all into words, but I remember the flight over, and Chris Harris's dad, Doc, was with us, and Chris and I were up early in the morning watching Pride and Prejudice, and we were watching everybody around us, and it's like, I don't know what time it was, but all the windows were shut, and everybody was laughing, and I was just like, oh my gosh, we were all exhausted, but it was just like, we were having so much fun, and then we landed in Tel Aviv and got everybody together and got on the bus, and I remembered it was just like, oh my gosh, I'm actually in the country where Jesus walked. Mm-hmm. And your mind cannot comprehend where you are. And all the teachings that I received from Nick, it was just like it became more real when I opened the Word and saw what he was teaching was actually happening. I was in the places it was actually happening.
Yeah.
And it was just his Nick at nights when we'd walk the walls of the city at night, and we would laugh, and we'd always end up at the Wailing Wall at night. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful sight.
Yeah. Did you have a hard time keeping up with him?
My gosh. That man had more energy in there, Israel, than anywhere he's ever had. I mean, when he would go, he'd go from 6 a.m. until whoever knows the time at night. But yeah, he was very hard. Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yet he would never exercise.
No.
Yeah.
No. That was
I don't know
exercise.
how he did that twice a year, maybe?
Twice a year.
He exercised in Israel. Yeah. Well, I was going to interject. What I remember about Dad's Israel trips is that I usually got left at home with someone, we don't, and you were with me.
Yeah.
And, but I remember when Kris would stay with us.
That's right.
And, I have so many stories. Like, I thought Kris had a special power to make, traffic lights change. She could go bang and it would change green. I couldn't figure it out.
It was a gift.
I still don't know quite how you did it. And as unhandy as Dad was.
Oh yeah.
Kris would fix all the stuff that he broke while he was gone.
Yeah. Yep.
And she would fix the equipment that he broke while trying, to fix things. And so I have really fond memories of Kris staying with us while Mom and Dad were on the
She was our favorite. There were some, but she was the best.
We had fun. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we are approaching the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. And I want to talk about that day. We were talking earlier about Dad's recollection of that day. And you've always been a very big character in his telling of the day. But we've never asked your telling. And so we'd just love for you to walk us through what that day was like for you.
Well, I remember I'm an early riser, and I was up at 5:30 and getting ready. I was usually at the church by 7, tried to be every day. And I got up about 5:30, and I was getting ready, and I had planned on that day to plant some flowers outside there were some pans. We had some wine barrels on the wall outside, and I was going to plant some pansies and some other stuff. And all of a sudden, I was looking in the mirror, and I had jeans on and a shirt, and I was going, I don't need to be wearing this for some reason. And it was like I had a great debate with God about wearing a dress or pants. It was the craziest thing in the world. I was going, should I wear a dress? Should I wear a pants? Should I wear a dress or should I wear pants? Next thing I know, I'm putting on heels and a dress. And I'm going to church, and I get there at 7 o'clock, and it was a beautiful, beautiful day. I mean, the birds are singing, people were walking around. And so I entered the church and went down to the kitchen, got a cup of coffee, and went to my office and had some quiet time. And then Nick came in, and he ran to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and he came back, and we were talking the night before. We had a trustees meeting, and Bill Porter, who at that time was one of the trustees, but we'd asked him to give us a bid to, we were getting AC and the heat redone in the church, and if he would give us a bid for that. So he had worked up some things, and he brought us some information of what we'd be looking at. And Nick came by my office, and he said, I said, Nick, can you come back? I'm going to show you something. And so he came back into my office. And we were standing over my desk. And it happened. It was like there was a boom that's so loud, that was so hard to understand. But we were both standing up, leaning on my desk. And it felt like there was no air in the room. It felt like we were being lifted off the floor. And then when the concussion of the bomb happened, we were put back down on the floor, and then the crashing began from the skylight dropping on the floor, the windows caving in. And I thought, oh my gosh, the oven in the kitchen blew up because we had people in the kitchen preparing an evening meal. And all I can remember was I said, get out, get out, get out. Nick flies out the south door, which is just 3 steps off of my office, and he's on 4th Street, and I saw people coming down from the upstairs from the office, and so I shot out of the door behind him, and both Nick and I started running up Robinson Street between the Murrah Building and the church, and it was so deadly quiet. There was not a sound, not a bird, not a whistle, not a siren, not anything, just dead silent. And I looked to the left of me, and there was a man laying on the ground, and he was lying on the ground next to a red Corvette, and all the windows in the car were blown out. And I started running towards him, and he got up. I said, are you okay? And he said, yes. He got in that car and drove off.
Wow.
And I continued running north towards the Y in the front side of the Murrah Building. And all of a sudden, you could hear bells and whistles and sirens and people yelling and screaming. And I looked to my right and saw that the frame of the window for the rose window had dropped onto the ground. The smoke was so thick, it was black, solid black, and you couldn't tell if it was the building of the Murrah Building or the church. It was that, it was like over these. So I continued running north, and then someone yelled out, car bomb, and the car exploded in the parking lot right across from the Murrah Building. So I shot up the driveway under the portico, and I could look into the church, and that big metal door that was on the north entrance was off its hinges. And all of a sudden, I could hear the phone ringing, and there were people running everywhere outside. So I ran into the lobby, grabbed the phone, And I said, hello. And it was Kris. And I said, she yelled, are you okay? And I said, yes. And then the phone went dead. And so I came back out of the building and I looked towards the YMCA and started running that way. And there were people everywhere. And I just thought, what in the world? What about our people? Because Paul Ice was one of our custodians and he was working. He was upstairs in the choir room. He was buffing the floor. And so I ran up the steps to find him. And he had been injured from the bomb. He was thrown from one end of the floor to the other from the concussion.
He was closer to the bombing, right?
Right.
He was in the
north
choir room,
side.
so he was on the north side closer,
right.
Yeah.
And so I ran up and I found him and I said, Paul, are you okay? And he was bleeding from his cuts from the glass that was flying and stuff like that. So I grabbed him and said, Paul, follow me. So I got the keys to my car, and we both got out to my car, and there was shrapnel, blue shrapnel all over my car. And I just thought, I'm leaving. I got to get this guy to the hospital. So I drove him to St. Anthony's. I finally was able to get back down to, what was the Episcopal Church? Not All Souls, St. Paul's.
Yeah.
Episcopal Church, that was the closest place I could come to park. And so I ran in heels and a dress from St. Paul's Episcopal all the way down to our church. And by that time, they started taping off everything. This one guy goes, you can't go in there. I said, yes, I can. I just tore through the yellow tape and got back to the church. And I found Nick, and I found he was with Brian Bishop at that time. And Nick says, Kris, you need to get all the papers. So I ran back into the church, got down to my office and grabbed all the papers from insurance and all the other stuff that we needed, and then got back out. And I think it was, I don't know, sometime in the afternoon when I got home. But it was crazy from that point forward. It's just like, I had 117 messages on my phone by the time I got home.
Wow.
And I think it was like 50-some emails on my email address. It was just like, I can't answer all these.
Mm-hmm.
That was in 95.
Right. That was in 95.
Right.
When we all didn't get 50 a minute.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. We've shared on our YouTube channel the Easter service prior to the bombing. And it's the the videoed service of our Easter Sunday, and it had this and I remember it, but Dad was talking about so many things going on at the church, and we had 3 full services that we were doing, and I think they were voting on like a family life center that they were going to be building, and I think, there was just so many things I always think about, it could have gone in such a different direction, that the growth of First Church, because it was really going gangbusters. But what do you remember about just all the things that the church was doing, like with the Family Life Center and all those plans that were?
Well, if I can back up a little bit here, on Wednesday after the bombing, I got a phone call at 4:00 in the morning from Brian Bishop. And he said, Kris, I need you to meet me downtown at the A&T building as soon as you can get here. And he said, I've called Terry Morton and Patty and Wilkins. What was it? Tony. Patty and Tony Wilkins, Gus Alfonso, and there's one other person. I can't remember. Brenda Punches. And we all met together and went to AT&T building. We had shots and all this other stuff so that we could get into the church.
What kind of shots were you having?
We
there?
had tennis shots and all kinds of shots.
Okay.
We had to do a tennis shot and not
right.
this.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, we were escorted into the south side of the church building so that we could recover things that were needed to have church service on Sunday morning. So we spent probably 8 hours in the church recovering, and ended up loading up two U-Haul trucks full of equipment that we need for church service. But that was a time, as I was walking around the church and looking at all the lilies still standing in the church and all the things, I also saw up on the balcony of where the choir was, as I opened the door into Terry's office, there was, remember the old cassette tapes?
Cassette tapes, yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. They had the little cover on, and when I opened the door to her office, there was a cassette tape cover, and it said, "He is risen." And I was just like, oh my gosh, he's everywhere. Mm-hmm. In the midst of all this turmoil. And that's when I walked to the back of the church. From there, I walked to the back of the church where the shepherd's window was. And there were two sets of pews in the very back that was divided just by a small row. And I walked up into that area. And as I looked down at my feet, I saw the head of Christ from the shepherd's window. And it was just like God said, you can do everything about it, but you can never remove Christ from this church. Mm-hmm. And I picked up the piece and I put it in my jacket, my coat jacket, and I gave that to Nick. I don't remember when I gave it to him, but I did give it to him. And from that point forward, it was chaos trying to get an office for the church to where we were going to have worship service, and trying to just make common sense for everybody to think we're going to be okay, but it's going to take some time. But as Jamie had asked, the church was in the process of transition because we needed more space. Mm-hmm. We did not have the space for all the people we were having in a church. And so we knew that if we had a place like First United Building that would accommodate for Sunday school, then we would have enough room to consider expanding the sanctuary or going to 3 services or whatever we should do. But then the bombing happened and God had a different plan. Mm-hmm. To this day, the smell of diesel, I cannot stand the smell of diesel, because outside of the church were 2 generators and they were run by diesel. And so that smell mm-hmm. of the exhaust was filling the church. And so every time I smelled the diesel, I would go right back to the church. I even to this day do the same thing.
Wow.
I'm super curious. Have you wrestled with why you were wearing a dress and heels and not jeans and tennis shoes?
The thing I've realized that God wanted me inside instead of out, because otherwise I'd been outside when the bombing occurred. This way, I was inside in the office where I was more protected.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, when you said I was going to be planting flowers, I thought that would have put her outside, but I know where she was.
Yeah.
So you weren't.
Did you see when they were using our lobby as a morgue?
Yes, I did.
I couldn't remember where I know it happened immediately, obviously, but, where did that fit in when Brian and Terry and you had to go back into the building? Had that already happened?
No. Yes, it had that. And actually they put a piece of paper over the window that you could look out into the lobby. Remember when you go from the lobby to the office in the sanctuary? Yes. Mm-hmm. There was that door, and they had a window. And they had covered it with paper so you could not see into that area. Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry, but I look.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was very hard.
That was.
Because they had brought refrigerated trucks into our parking lot. And they were putting bodies in there after they had laid to rest in our lobby for a period.
I remember when Dad went down there, and I can't remember if he looked if he saw something or if someone told him, but he thought that he had seen Lou Greer,
Yes.
who was a member of our church,
Right.
and his daughter was in our youth group with me,
Right.
and he was just, and he couldn't get a hold of him, I think, and he was really concerned, and
Very, yeah.
so still, like every once in a while, I'll see Lou Greer just at random at a Target or somewhere, and I just always give him a hug because I just think about how,
Absolutely.
you know, because he was downtown. Lou worked downtown, I think.
He did. In fact, he was just south of the church, and I'm not sure where he worked either. So, yeah, I remember that when Nick said that he thought he saw Luke Greer, and that's, it took us a little bit to get a hold of him, but we did get a hold of him.
Yeah. I did want to, just to make everyone situationally aware, your office was like one of those it was partially underground, right? Because you took
Correct.
about 4 or 5 steps down to
Right.
where your office was.
In the very basement.
Yeah. So when you talk about feeling like you were kind of floating in your office,
Right.
you were,
Well, I was on the ground floor.
Underground,
Yes, I
yeah.
was below ground.
yeah. And I remember seeing pictures of your office, and the ceiling tiles were,
They were knocked out.
everything was knocked out, and
And you remember the clock? I remember finding a clock in Terry's office, and it stopped at 9:02.
yeah.
I mean, it was just, and the lilies in the church on the Easter after Easter, and when we looked at the sanctuary and saw those lilies still standing, it was just like, it was wild.
Talk to me about the stained glass.
Wow. There were several rescue workers that were, after they would work a period of time, they would come over to the church. Pardon me. They would come over to the church and have a little respite time before they would have to go back and serve. And so I'm not sure who started it or how it started. I know how it started, but I don't know who started it. But there was a rescue worker that had gone into the sanctuary, and he saw all the shattered pieces of glass, which are stained glass. And he thought, he knew that someone would need these pieces. So he found boxes throughout the church in the church office, and he would spend his time resting, collecting these pieces of glass. And I don't remember how many boxes, but it was so many boxes of stained glass that he collected. And it was just like, God knew that we needed those pieces, because today they are still, I've got 3 pieces of my own and just love them because I know they bring into remembrance where they come from.
And there's a piece of them that became part of the rebuild,
Yes.
right? Even the face of Jesus that you found.
Yes. It's now in the chapel in the new church. And God takes the broken pieces of our life, and by his love makes them whole.
Mm-hmm.
And that church window was made by a couple of ladies in, they were north of the church. I can't remember the name of the company. But yes, the stained glass, we loved those windows. We had 2 rows of windows. They were absolutely beautiful. Now in the new church, we have 3 rows of windows, which are absolutely gorgeous.
They are.
One thing that I just want to mention right now is that I had forgotten, Kris, that you were the one that found that face of Jesus blown out from that window. And I just remember that they took those pieces and created they call it the memorial window.
Yes.
In the new sanctuary, in the chapel,
Right.
in the new church.
Right.
And, but all those little pieces that the people collected, Diane and Scotty, came up with an idea, and those little pieces now are literally been formed into precious little angels, and they are all over the world.
Amen.
I mean, literally all over the world. If you remember, Nick and I were in Israel one of the times, sitting in a pizza place on the corner,
Right.
and someone said, "Oh, you all are from the States and everything." Yes, where from? Well, Oklahoma City. And they said, "Oh, that's the church that, where they lost the beautiful windows." And we're talking about how they had gone to one of the festivals or something and were able to purchase an angel that was of that stained glass. Oh. And the lady leaned over and she said, "I have one." And I mean, she was like from, I don't know, New York or somewhere, but they're everywhere, know, and they're just have been such a blessing to so many people. And we used those angels to help to have funds to build our building back, But I just think about those people that collected all those pieces, and now we're almost out of it. I think all of
It's amazing.
Most of the glass is gone now.
30 years.
But 30 years,
Wow.
and they're still making those beautiful angels, but they're almost gone. So.
Oh.
Well, and how old were the windows when they were destroyed?
How old were the
They were
windows?
over 100 years old, right?
Oh, yes, definitely. The church was 1904.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 1904.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the days following the bombing, the long days, the many months following the bombing. What do you remember what it was like to be on staff and in the projects and the rebuild? I mean, you were the facility manager. Like, that was a big job.
That was a challenging job. I'm just so thankful God that guided my steps.
Mm-hmm. And we're so thankful we had you.
I don't know what in the world Nick would have done without you, Kris. That was, those were hard years. Those were really hard years. But, oh my goodness.
The thing that I can start from is the service that we had at OCU. Mm-hmm. And there were just hundreds of people there. And we had several meetings for the administrative council and the trustees and all the other committees. But where did we go from here? Mm-hmm. And we had several people reach out to our church and offered several things. We had a gentleman, and his name, Bibick Williams was a chairman of the trustees, and he had several friends that he had done business with downtown. And I think the name John Williams, who was an attorney downtown, he helped us get our offices, but we had the people who were managing the First National Center downtown called us and offered 2 floors of offices for us to go in, to move our church office to their location free of charge. And who knew that 3 years later we'd still be there. Mm-hmm. But we had the offices down there. And then we had church at Trinity Baptist Church, which was a church that offered space so that we would be able to have church and Sunday school. And then we had several of businesses like What's Cooking, who were caterers for us to do loaves and fishes, continued that ministry. And we just had so many people pouring into us every day. And it takes a village, mm-hmm. A large village, to accomplish what we did. Mm-hmm. But God directed our steps by all means. But it was trying to get the staff back in place to continue the ministries of the church. There were many days that you would wake up. My concentration was the church building itself. And so I remember that Byron was really the person that I leaned on the most to help get us through that time. And between Byron and myself, we were at the church almost 40 straight days without a break, 6 and 7 in the morning till 6 and 7 at night, just trying to get things to where we had to empty the church out. We had to find storage for the all the pews and the paintings and the office equipment, the church equipment, just finding a place for all the materials of the church, and then finding a place to have Sunday school. And there's so much going on. Well, Sunday school and church. And of course, I said Trinity was the backup place for that. But it was hard to know how to progress from having a church totally bombed out to what we were going to do for the new sanctuary. We knew at that time the sanctuary was the primary focus. And that's when we got hold of architects and all kinds of people to begin the process of rebuilding church and the insurance money and all those kinds of things that it takes to get this whole story put together. But, it was just so interesting how people would come into place when you needed them the most.
Mm-hmm. What was it like the day that we marched back to the location?
That was victory. That was victory. It was so interesting to see the little children running and skipping and jumping, the people talking and hugging each other. And I don't remember, was it a mile? Mm-hmm. I think it was a mile.
Yeah.
And the church, the body of Christ just progressing back to their home, and where we surrounded the front doors of the church and waited for the bishop to open the church so we could go in. It was glorious. Mm-hmm. That was wild.
Well, as a person on this side of the door, thank you. Because I didn't get to see it until that moment. And you were responsible for all of the pieces that went into that building. And thank you for the gift of that beautiful, beautiful sanctuary.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a labor of love.
It was a big day.
Big day. And so many people to celebrate with. We overcame, and when God... I remember the sign on the south side of the building. God reigns and we will remain, and we did.
Yeah. We did.
Yeah.
As this anniversary rolls around year after year, what emotions hit you as the community starts to remember the events and those that were lost?
My heart hurts for those that were lost. I pray for comfort, continual, and strength for those that are surviving, and those whose family have lost so many loved ones. And yet I'm so thankful that we have come this distance, and that God has been with us through it all.
Looking back all these years later, do you have one key takeaway that you would like to pass along to all those who are listening?
May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Romans 15:13. That has been a scripture that has stuck with me for years, because it took trusting in God, knowing that He's going to bring us a distance that it took to get here, that He never left us nor forsakes us. And I remember that there have been several times when some people say, well, why did God allow this to happen? I just know that God understands His ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. But He never leaves us nor forsakes us. We just have to lean and trust Him for that.
Yeah.
Kris, one thing that I remember growing up in that old church, I remember the first night we got here and went down and saw it, and it was just tiles missing, and it was just in really, really bad shape. And it was in bad shape for many years as things ramped up. And But I kind of remember about the time that you came to the church and things started to get nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of a sudden walls were textured and painted and new carpet was happening. And so, and as I've just known you and how meticulous you are with, your space, and so and having known you, just obviously you'd watch us when parents were gone and things like that. And so I kind of saw you when I looked at that building and how clean it was and how perfect every little corner was in an old beat up building that I knew as being very, very old and beat up. And I've often, whenever I think of the old church and how nice it got and then how it got blown up, I'm like, gosh, it had to be really hard for Kris, just how many little projects and different things that you put into the building, and then to see it, all in 1 minute, kind of all be destroyed. I don't know. Is there any good side to that, or was it very hard to just see all the work that you'd put in over the years to the building? And
some would say I'm anal because I'm very particular about how things look.
Yeah, meticulous was a very nice word, Jamie.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, we did a spiritual gifts class, Nick did, and we walked through that. Mm-hmm. For years, I would think about, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? Why am I doing it? And I'll do all kinds of projects. And then I realized that one of my gifts is being a servant. And so I found it pleasing to do things that other people wouldn't do, or to try and help them make it better. But, when things were blown apart, I just knew that they would be better in the future than they were in the past. So looking at the church building when it was blown up, I just dismissed that. It hurt my heart. But yet I knew that something better was going to come down the line. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting when we were thinking about building the Christian building, God knew that we needed something bigger and better. So he had to make a way for that to happen. And not saying that God planned this by any means, but that bombing helped project us to where the church is to today. And it is absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And this is just a side story, and you can edit this out. But I remember that Smith and Pickle were the contractors for the church. And they had laid the foundation. They were forming the walls and stuff like that. And I would go in and almost on a daily basis, I would either go into the old church and watch the progress from the roof of the Christian building, or I would go down to the chapel and I would watch from that direction. And there were several times that I would go into the church, the new church. And this one particular time I had gone into the music room where Terry's office was. And there was it was a calendar with women in it. And I found the supervisor for the contractors coming in, and I pulled him aside and I walked him into that, and I said, and I pointed at that calendar, and he looked at me and I looked at him. I said, that is totally unacceptable. And I do not want anybody smoking in this building. I don't want anybody spitting on the floor. I said, this is God's house. And we need to treat it as God's house. I love that. And I just left it. And he looked at me and thought, this woman means business. I thought, yeah, I mean business.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, we all knew Kris meant business.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh my gosh, really? Yeah, but he was kind of crazy. Some of this, another story is that when the chapel was built down on the corner, because we had all those people flowing over to look into the side where the bombing had occurred, and people were putting little things into the fences, memorials or remembrances. We had the chapel built. John Waldo and several people put all the work into getting that chapel built. And one day, I heard a bunch of sirens coming from the north side of the church, or down 5th Street. And this limousine and several police cars pulled into the church, to the parking lot. And I thought, because we've had so many people, I met the President Clinton and all of his staff, and so many people I'd met. And I just thought, okay, I wonder who this big shot is. And I was picking up all this stuff, and I was bending over, and the car stopped, opened the door, and this person stepped out. I went, got to be. It was the Duchess of York. I went, oh my gosh. And I said, good morning. And she said, good morning. And she said, this is the chapel. And I said, yes. And she said, do you mind if I spend time here? And I said, no. And I went, I need to shut my mouth more.
Wow.
But it's just like, it was amazing how many people that I've met just through this whole circumstance. So just a tidbit.
I love it.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I really met Kris. I can still picture her coming into the entry, and I think it was all about wallpaper or something. I was wanting.
You went strip wallpaper off the walls.
I wanted to get permission. You know, preachers' families have to get permission to do anything to the parsonage, and the parsonage needed some help. But anyway, I said, would you mind coming to the house? And I just want to do this one wall. Well, that led to
everything.
we ended up doing a lot. But anyway, yeah, we stripped the wallpaper. That was when we became close friends.
And then when we were doing some painting one weekend, I don't know what it was, raining or something, and we had stepped out of the front door, and right there on the flower bed and was a little hole, and there were a bunch of SNAKEs in it, and Deke had been spitting his skull spit in that little hole, and all the little SNAKEs were congregating in that hole, and Chris's toes just curled.
They are curled now.
Oh my gosh.
Oh gosh, I'll tell you what, it was just like, oh my gosh. And then when you had the dogs in the backyard, Chauncey, and they were running down the fence to get into the ditch so they can run that ditch line, it was just like, oh my gosh, it's like a circus around here.
Our uncle calls it the ant pile.
Yeah.
Oh, the ant pile.
Anthill. The anthill.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. We had some good times.
We love it.
As we're wrapping up, is there anything about the story that we have not covered that you want to share?
I am so thankful that Nick Harris is our pastor. And he brought us to the point where we all relied on God's love and grace and favor to come to the place we are in our lives today. God's grace is what fills us every day. His mercy overflows in our lives every day. He loves us beyond measure. And he will never, ever, I say that once again, he never leaves us or forsakes us. Even in the midst of joy and turmoil, weeping and crying and grieving, he comforts us with his love. And we will too make it if we just continue to lean on him. And so I'm thankful that he has brought me this far. I'm so thankful for you, Jamie Dawn, and for you, Kris, my dear sister, Christ, and for you, sweet. You have been a joy in my life. I'm thankful for you. I really appreciate this time. And I want to thank you.
We love you too, darling.
This time is a gift for us and for all of our listeners.
Yes, I love you.
Tell us what relational grace means to you.
Whew. Grace is something that God pours out on us every day when we don't deserve it. He picks us up, dusts us off, and guides us on. I'm thinking of the story of the young man who left his father. And when he was in the midst of the hog pen, he looked up and knew that he would be better off in his father's house than where he was in the mud pit. And by God's love and grace, he poured him out, pulled him out, and guided him home to his father, who loved him unconditionally. And that is what God does to us. He loves us unconditionally, and by His grace, we are saved. His Son, Jesus, who gives us that grace every day when we don't deserve it. And I'm so thankful.
I hope everyone enjoyed listening to our conversation with our very special and dear friend Kris Skinner. Since this original recording, I've had several days to reflect on this conversation and on Kris's perspective in general. I keep coming back to what Kris said about her realization of her spiritual gift of servanthood and how content she was with her role in this grand story. It made me realize how imperative it is for us to all understand our own spiritual gifts and to always ensure we're using them to their full potential. Introspectively, I reflected on my own spiritual gifting, and honestly, I believe I could use a renewed awareness to ensure my efforts align with my gifts, just like Kris is aligned with her efforts at First Church for all those years. All this said, I would love to invite you all to listen to Pastor Harris's 14-part series on the spiritual gifts that Kris mentioned. For easier reference, those teachings can be found starting at episode 88 through episode 102. It's an extremely unique approach to learning the spiritual gifts, one that, as we have heard today, can be transformative in the Christian walk. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Don't forget to connect with Ariel Ministries on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe to our email list at arielministries.com. That's Ariel spelled A-R-I-E-L. We look forward to keeping you updated on upcoming episodes and projects. If you would like to support the missional efforts of Ariel Ministries in Tharaka, Kenya with Each One Feed One, we'd like to remind you that 10% of all donations to Ariel Ministries will support this missional effort. Visit arielministries.com/give for online donations and other methods of giving. To learn more about the Tharaka mission, you can visit arielministries.com/missions. You can also listen to episode 26 for a deeper dive into how our relationship with Each One Feed One and the McCarter family started over 35 years ago, where we are today, and where we're headed in the future.